Well, I want to talk to you first about this fantastic book.
Oh, good.
I loved the book, and I have so many questions because anything that takes place in New York City in the '70s, I'm in.
Me
like,
too.
I'm like already.
That's why it's set in the 70s, because of my love for that period.
So my first question about this, excuse me, is when did you move to New York, and what were you looking to achieve
Yeah.
coming here?
I first came to the city around, I grew up right outside the city, right near the Bronx, Mount Vernon. So Mount Vernon's one of the first cities in over the city line, Westchester County. So if you take the 2 train to the last stop, 241st, you can walk to where I used to live. So after high school, actually in high school I was living a little further upstate, like an hour north, and then after high school I moved back to Mount Vernon where I lived as a kid. I lived with my grandparents, and I started coming to acting school in New York. And that's really how it started.
Was Manhattan the city? Like, did you come to see shows and movies? Was it
As a kid, yeah, with my
concerts?
family, but not only a little bit. I just had started to, like, in my late teens with friends to see like a couple of concerts. But it really was, I know I wanted to act. I also wanted to like make movies and like write and direct, but I didn't know how to. I didn't know how to go about being an actor either. But those things kind of seemed like impossible. So did being an actor. But I went to Lee Strasberg Institute in 1983.
Wow.
And there were a couple of fellow students there that, some of whom were in The Sopranos and wound up, and who I still work with today on different like indie things and theater stuff. And we started doing something outside eventually, after a couple of years on our own. Like it started out one was a band that started out of one of the students there who came from Boston, where he was playing in bands in Boston. Then he was starting to get into acting. We started like a no-wave band.
Oh, wow.
In 1986.
What was that called?
Black Angus. We didn't put out any records, but
Were you the singer?
no, there was no singer. It was
Okay.
it was an instrumental. It was a quartet, 2 guitars, bass, drums, and no singer.
Did you gig in Manhattan?
Yeah.
Where'd you play?
We played at a place called McGovern's, which used to be on Spring Street. Spring near like Greenwich.
Yeah.
And it was a bar that had a stage, and they started doing, they had like just local bands play. And the drummer was friends with the owner, McGovern, so we started playing there. And we just wrote and made demos, and then that kind of.
Nothing's been released?
I don't think it should be released.
Well, I think a lot of people watching this are going to be real curious. They're going to Google the shit out of this.
I don't
right
know
now.
if you can find it, but
That era is really fascinating to me, that no-wave era.
I know it is.
And so I do want to ask you who was on the scene around that time that you might have run into, like James Chance and the Contortions, or Lydia Lunch, or I know Basquiat had a band at that time.
With Vincent Gallo, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the early Sonic Youth incarnations, I remember, was one of the earliest shows that I saw. There's a band called Miracle Legion. I don't know if you know those guys. Mark Mulcahy and Ray Neal came from Connecticut. But they became one of my favorite bands around that time. The Feelies was a big band that I used to love very much.
Were you thinking that rock and roll was your path, or was acting your top focus, would you say? Or writing?
Acting was always kind of because I guess because I was going to school for it, it made it seem a little more legitimate. But you know, very early on we started making theater. So I started producing theater when I was in my early 20s, and then directing theater, and then writing came kind of after that. I was very insecure pretty much in everything, but especially in music. It was a weird thing, but nobody really ever gave me encouragement in music as a young guy. And there was something about that was difficult. I was in a band where I sang and wrote lyrics with two guys who were in a band called Speed the Plow, which was from that kind of Maxwell, Jersey, North Jersey scene.
Hoboken.
Yeah, from that scene. And Chris O'Donovan was the drummer, and Dave, I'm blanking on Dave's name. No, Rich Barnes was a guitar player. And we wrote a bunch of songs, and we have demos, you know, Chris has sent me some of them. And I had to leave the country for quite a while to do something, I think an acting thing. And I was like, they really were ready to record and do stuff, and I felt really bad holding them up. So I was like, you know, let's take a break. And then they got a woman named Brenda Souter who played with the Feelies. She became a singer, and I think a bass player. So a lot of those songs that we recorded, they did with her lyrics and melodies. So that's kind of cool that their first album was some of those songs that Wild Carnation's the name of the band.
Okay.
Those guys were really fun to work with, but I had a lot of insecurities, to be honest.
Well.
And as an actor,
how would your family and, you know, Mount Vernon, the extended world that you were coming from, what would their attitude have been towards playing rock and roll versus being an actor?
My family were always very supportive of everything I did. I'm very lucky that way. My parents, you know, they'd be fine with it. And I'm not saying like I wasn't encouraged. That's why, you know, you have to do it anyway. I mean, it's just like, you know, I mean, that's how life goes too. It's just, you know, your path and your you know, certain things take a while to ripen, I think.
Sure.
You know, even on a very micro level, like when you're writing a song, say.
It's got to stay in the oven a long time.
Yeah, some things you just like, some you start and you finish like kind of relatively quickly, and then some like you just put away and then like a year later.
Or a decade
later you go back. That is a pretty good chord progression.
Now,
that melody is pretty cool.
Is some of your Zopa material, any of it go back?
Yeah. Actually, on the first album, there's a song called Roll It Off Your Skin, which was written in probably around 1988 on my own. I wasn't, well, the chords were written and the lyrics, but the song that's on the record is a collaboration with Elijah and Olmo, because Zopa's a very, very, very collaborative thing. No matter who's bringing in the words or the chords or the melody.
Sure.
It's you know, like
It's
all the
band.
writing credit, the music and lyrics are all always three of us credited for everything, because it's
a band.
very much collaborative. A band, but not all bands do that. You know?
Sure,
I mean, I think sometimes it's hard to separate what is informing what, you know what I mean? Sometimes a drum beat can inform what you're gonna say.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I feel that way.
I
feel
agree.
very connected to Elijah and Olmo, and it's hard to, pretty much what I do musically is Zopa. It's not my music and these guys help. Zopa is what I do musically.
Right.
It's I don't perform ever as a solo act. I don't have a desire to do that. That's not what I do. It's that thing, whatever that thing is, the three of us together is what I'm interested in.
So in your musical, so the stuff you're doing in the 80s, you describe as no wave. Was Lou Reed a big in your constellation at that point?
When I discovered
Always?
him, he was. I
Yeah.
discovered him because I was very, as a teenager, until I got to the city, I really didn't know a lot about anything beyond classic rock radio,
Yeah.
which I liked. I just wasn't exposed to it, and I didn't really. And then, like, it was all at once, like everything
Yeah.
kind of, it's like smoking pot or taking acid for the first, like okay, everything starts to perception shifts, right?
Yes.
Which was actually being in New York made that happen. Being in New York, my perception shifted, especially at that 1983. And I still very much feel that way about this city, despite the changes and that the world is different and the city's different. But there's something about this place that it remains unique and special.
I mean, I feel like you captured in the book something I'm really obsessed with, which is a lot of people, Lou Reed included, who comes from Long Island. Patti Smith comes from where I grew up in South Jersey. Bruce Springsteen, Central Jersey. Billy Joel out on the island, right? You got Wu-Tang in Staten Island. All these New York Dolls in Staten Island. All these incredible artists that were in the burbs and on the fringe. They weren't actually in the middle of it. That had some kind of vision of what they wanted to find in themselves by going through the tunnel or across the bridge. And in
Yes,
the book,
very much so.
Our hero in the book makes not a geographically distant move, but certainly a cultural, spiritual, psychic move from Queens to Manhattan. And his life changes pretty much instantly.
Yeah.
Does this parallel your story with coming into the city?
No doubt. It definitely parallels. I didn't live here with my parents or anything. There's something about being a teenager, and like whenever I met kids who grew up in the city, they always seemed much more worldly than others, right? There's something about, actually, Elijah and Olmo, who were both quite a bit younger than me. They're both about 15 years younger than I am, I think, right? Yeah. Actually 17 years younger than me.
Oh, wow.
I think maybe that's right. Yeah. They both grew up, Olmo grew up in the Village and Elijah grew up in Chelsea. And they kind of had that, more worldly, and I always noticed that about kids. So
You're
I
just
didn't
exposed, and I live in Philadelphia. I lived in New York for 13 years, and the greatest thing about New York that I miss, the thing I miss the most, is the subway, because it's the great equalizer. You are, you walk, the doors open, and there's Wall Street guy next to homeless, next to every language spoken at all hours of the night, and you're physically thrown up against people at all hours of the day, and it's, I think, one of the greatest features of New York City.
It's also a very efficient system of transportation.
Yeah.
You can get really far relatively quickly.
So The Perfume Burned His Eyes gets into a period of Lou's life and career that is only very recently getting attention. Since his passing, this discussion of his time with Rachel and his years with his partner Rachel. And I feel like 20 years ago, there wasn't much discussion about this very significant relationship in his life.
No, there wasn't. It was actually very hard to find information on Rachel's life post Lou.
Yeah.
Really hard. And it wasn't until after I published the book and I had a conversation with Sylvia Reed, I think her name is Ramos now, or that was her
his
original
wife.
name. His second wife.
His second wife, right.
She told me that Rachel died in January, I think, of 1990, of AIDS, that I think she contracted in prison, which at that time would have been a men's prison.
Yeah.
And then I found out that she is buried in Hart Island, which is the pauper burial island off near the Bronx, unmarked grave, and they know the section is. So, which was really rough finding that out. That level of neglect and.
I mean, this is an important person. This is an important relationship.
Yeah.
And so much of his work and some of my favorite songs of his are inspired by Rachel. And I love how you treated their relationship with great respect. You depict a tumultuous relationship, which isn't surprising to anybody who knows anything about Lou Reed in that time. But it seems there's a lot of love and domesticity in the midst of the storm.
Yeah, apparently there was that. There was also, I think, Lou was very hard on her at times, and I don't know the extent of it, but I didn't really want to get into, because the story's not about their relationship.
Sure.
Really, because they're characters in the book at this point. I'm not writing a biography, right? So really, what it served as was this kid being exposed to a relationship that in his history was very unorthodox.
Sure.
Yet, from his point of view, very normal and very loving, like you said, and very and he was comfortable around them.
Yeah, and he is an uprooted kid without a dad, and his mother is an addict. And for a few minutes there, he sort of finds a quick little chosen family there, comfort zone in Lou's apartment.
Yeah. When I started coming to New York, I was always like the youngest in whatever group I was in. So there were people who were much older than me that I learned a lot from, and literally you can drive to Mount Vernon in like 20 minutes from here. Yet when I got here, it was so much broader spectrum of life, types of people, ways of living, ways of thinking, so different. And for me, it was just very, and I kind of couldn't wait to be in the city. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't really reminisce about the old neighborhood like that.
Sure.
Oddly enough, the first ancestor that came from Italy, my great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather, they settled a few blocks from where I live now in Manhattan. So
this was an Italian-American...
The turn of the century, like
immigrant,
1900, yeah. They lived on West 69th Street, all the way west, which now there's high rises, but back then it was all tenements.
Yeah.
And I don't live very far from there, which is kind of interesting.
Wow.
It's kind of come full circle.
Now, did you tell me about your actual interactions with Lou Reed, because I want to try to understand what made you decide to write about him. Did you meet him when, and what was it like?
Well, I'll kind of go in reverse. I started this book, I think, in summer of 2013. Lou was not a character in the book. It was just about a 15 or 16-year-old boy, because my middle child, my oldest son, was hitting that age, and he was going through, difficult teenage crap.
The shit that we all go through.
The shit that we all go through. And I was just like, because you're dad, so you have to be a dad, but I also wanted to relate again. So I started writing a story about a teenage boy. And I chose to set it in 77, just out of a fondness for New York, like as you have in that era. Because I was 11 in 77, I was not in New York. And then a few months later, Lou died.
Yeah.
By then, the last decade or so of his life, we had become friends. So his death really hit me on a lot of levels, as a fan, as a New Yorker, as an artist, and as a friend.
And I know that you both practiced meditation and Buddhist practice that became very important to him late in life.
Yeah. Actually, the last exchange we had was he was writing a book about meditation, and he was asking me about my practice. That I think the book is coming out or came out. He wanted to get some words about meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So, kind of in the mourning his death, it was like, what if the kid lives? Because Lou did live on the east side, like in Midtown East, around that time, which is kind of weird, right? Lou living in the east side, like in
this
the 50s
doorman building.
Yeah, which is he did. He lived in the Village for a long time when I first started seeing him, but he did for a while, which I found kind of odd. So I was like, what if Lou is the upstairs neighbor? And then it all kind of came together. But the first time, I lived in the Village. I moved to Greenwich Village 1988. And he was living there at the time. He used to live on Christopher Street. I lived right near there, and I used to see him walking around.
Sure.
For a kid, seeing like Allen Ginsberg or Gregory Corso, Lou Reed, like walking
out
around
on the
your
street.
neighborhood. And
yeah.
shit. It's a heady thing, you
Yeah.
know. And I used to see him once in a while, and I never approached him. And then one day I was at a Knicks game.
Which, by the way, was probably smart.
Wow.
I think if you go up to Lou Reed at 10 in the morning when he's going to get his coffee, that's not going to work out great for you.
No. Well, this is the first time I finally had the courage to go up to him was at a Knicks game. The game's over. I see Lou on the escalator at the Madison Square Garden. And I had just got cast in a movie called I Shot Andy Warhol.
Sure.
About Valerie Solanas.
This is early 90s?
Yeah, I guess.
Kind of.
Yeah, 92 or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm playing Undine, who was one of the Warhol superstars, but a friend of Lou's.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, this is a great icebreaker. Except that I knew, and I read a quote by him. He was really pissed off they were making a movie about Valerie Solanas, who shot and almost killed one of his best friends,
Sure.
Andy Warhol. So I was like, fuck it, I'll go up to him. I said, hi, I'm an actor. I don't think he recognized me from anything before that, whatever. I said, I'm a fan of yours, and I'm doing a movie. I'm doing this movie. I shot Andy Warhol. I know you're not too happy about it. He goes, I think it's despicable. They're making a movie about that psychotic bitch. I'm like, yeah, I know. I understand, but I'm playing a friend of yours on Dean. He went, good luck. I'm like, and he turned away. He's riding up the escalator. I'm like, I'm just like, and then he like turned back. He goes, so I walk up and he goes, listen, do your work hard, and just remember, he was very, very funny.
Oh,
and that was it. That was the first time.
Wow. That's That's a great Lou story because, you know, the front-facing piece is the fuck you piece,
Yeah.
but then right behind it is this deep humanity is always there.
That's the
He
thing.
must have thought for a second, damn, I must have pissed this kid off. He's about to go to work playing this guy, and I just made him feel really shitty about it.
I think that exchange really inspired that whole thing, because his characters really, you know, the kid experiences kind of both of those things. But yeah, that's and then I saw him at a party, and I mentioned I had just listened to his new record.
Uh-huh.
Then in 2001, he had an album called Ecstasy, which is a very good album.
I love that
Very
record.
underrated record.
That's that.
Rock Minuet, I mean.
Yeah, and the song "Ecstasy" with the cellos.
Ecstasy is great.
Yeah.
Baton Rouge, that's it's
Paranoia Key of E.
fantastic. It's
Yeah.
a really underrated record. A late career, really good. And so he was doing shows for that, and he was doing one at the Old Knitting Factory in Tribeca, and it was sold out. And I asked my manager if she could get me tickets. I was on The Sopranos by then. So she called his publicist. They said, yeah, we can get him in. So my wife and I go. It's actually like across the street from where we were living. And they had seats in the balcony for us. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And the band was great. Lou was fantastic. He played the Blue Mask.
Oh, man.
He played a version of Blue Mask that like knocked my socks off. And he was, I guess, at that time, like 60.
Yeah,
And it was
he was still letting it rip.
rip, blew my mind. And then we were leaving, and the publicist said, oh, Lou wants to see you backstage. I'm like, and we went backstage, and he came and gave me a big hug, and talking about this. He loved The Sopranos and my character, and then from there we stayed in touch. And we used to do a lot of benefits. We both were did stuff for the Jazz Foundation of America, and also the Tibet House, Tibet Fund, and Tibet House.
I'm not surprised to hear that he was a Sopranos fan
Yeah.
because, and this is true of a lot of the work that you've done in terms of acting and writing and your music, and his work there is a fixation on the brutality, the violence, and the criminal, and not shying away from the tougher aspects of this life that we live, but with this deep humanity behind it. And I would imagine that he would have loved The Sopranos, so that's cool to hear.
Yeah, and that was
Well,
the beginning of us.
Your
knowing
book,
each other.
I think, is part of this, I don't want to say critical reevaluation, because everybody's always known Lou as a genius, but this better understanding of his private life in the 70s. And this story of Rachel is one that really needs to be told and understood,
Yeah, Lou never spoke of her after they broke up publicly, and apparently at his memorial, which I didn't go to, at the Apollo, there was no mention of Rachel, which some people found kind of glaringly absent. But Lou was very, upfront, open. I mean, they were photographed. I mean, she was on his albums.
They went
they
to
were touring together.
film premieres and
Absolutely.
on the
He
road.
was,
For sure.
That he was in love with her, and they had a relationship, and my wife and I are trying to start I should say this because it's good to talk about these things because that's how they happen. We're trying to start a scholarship in Rachel's name for trans kids.
Fabulous.
Because I think she needs to be remembered, and her story needs to be remembered, so it never happened. That kind of tragic ending and treatment of human being doesn't happen anymore. So we want to create a scholarship to, in her name, in her memory, to foster leadership in that community,
Yeah.
and so you can have leaders within the community advancing our society and enlightening our society.
I think that's fabulous. I
But
think that's
it's, we've been meeting with a few foundations and corporations, but it's not quite there yet. So maybe anyone interested in talking about it.
okay. We'll put the bat signal out there.
I
for
usually
that.
don't talk about, but it's
But
kind of good sometimes.
You
to
can
put
talk
it out,
about
right?
anything you want to talk about,
Yeah.
and we have a lot of different kinds of people that watch this and will see this. I think that's a wonderful thing you're trying to do. I love the book, and one of the things I noticed, I turned on the back, and there's a quote here by Nick Tosches, and I have talked about this with some of my fans and viewers before because he's one of my favorite writers. And many years ago, when I was living in New York, I had a buddy that was working with Nick Tosches on as a publicist for one of his newer books. And he knew I was a fanatic for Nick. And he said, be at this park bench in Tribeca at this time tomorrow. And
Was it on Murray Street?
yeah, he said, be at this specific bench.
Yes, I know the bench.
He said, don't come up to the bench until I text you it's okay to come up to the bench, and clear about 3 hours of your schedule. It might be no minutes, or it might be 3 hours of minutes, but I'm gonna try and get you some time with Nick. And sure enough, he starts talking to Nick. Hey, this kid plays piano like Jerry Lee Lewis, and he's got this great rock and roll band called Low Cut Connie. I think you would like it. He loves your Hellfire book and your Dino book. So I got the Johnny Carson call over to the bench, and I spent one afternoon with Nick. So I want to ask you, did you know Nick? And obviously you read this book, and
I knew him from I used to live around the corner from that bench. Now, I was a fan. I had read some of his stuff, but I didn't know what he looked like. So for a couple of years, there was this guy on the bench. He has a very distinctive face. He had a very distinctive face,
and
right?
was always smoking.
Smoking, well-dressed. So there's a deli right across from the bench. That was my deli, where I would go like every day to buy whatever, groceries or whatever, coffee, newspaper. And then I got I forget which book. I get a book and I see the picture. I'm like, that's Nick Tosches. That's the guy on the bench.
Yeah.
It was in front of there's a bar there. I think it's Murray Street Bar or whatever.
Well, there was a bar right there
Yeah.
that let him smoke.
Yeah.
That
That's
was
why
his
he was there.
obsession.
I think it's a Murray Street pub or something.
He said New York was never the same after the smoking ban, and he had a buddy. He had a buddy at one of that bar on that block, and
Yeah.
they would let him smoke at certain times in the back.
So, and then I was at Walker's one night in Tribeca, and he happened to be there, and we started talking. His last two books are, the biographies are amazing. The last two novels are my favorites of his, and they really
Because he got into this ancient.
Under
you know-
Tiberius.
Yeah.
Under Tiberius and Me and the Devil. Me and the Devil is like set in Lower Manhattan in Tribeca, and he's kind of uses himself as this and becomes a vampire, which is really cool.
Well, he said the funniest thing he said to me, and we had some very, with Nick, it's like extremely highbrow or extremely lowbrow.
Yes.
It's like nothing in the middle.
Yeah.
And so we're talking. He's telling me about Aeschylus and Plato and shit. And
Oh God!
he was very
on classical
This was a
literature,
brilliant guy. He
history,
read.
Yeah. Oh my God! Yeah.
And then we start talking about rock and roll and movies and all kinds of things. And I'm like taking notes with my eyes the whole time. I want to remember his whole conversation. And then he goes, Adam, he's smoking. He's like, you want to know the best movie that I saw in the last year? You gotta go see it. And I'm thinking he's gonna tell me, I don't know. He said, I said, what? Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I said, oh yeah? He said, fucking great. And he goes in this long monologue about
Why it's good.
why it's so great, and he said it's the only good Lincoln movie. It's the only good Abe Lincoln movie. So I go home. I go home and I'm paying to stream. I'm like, this better be, I mean, he says, and I'm not gonna sit here and say it's the worst movie I ever saw, but let's just say I didn't see in it what he saw in it, I think he really liked vampires.
That's
part of it.
what he became in Me and the Devil, that's for sure. And
So
then the last book, he really it's a novel, about basically the guy who created Christ, like the PR guy. He was a speechwriter for Tiberius, and then he sees this layabout kind of hippie. He says, I can make him a messiah, and he becomes his PR guy, his Colonel Parker or something. But the story's so researched and accurate to the time that makes it really fascinating.
Listen, I haven't written a book yet. I hope to. You wrote a great book, but no matter how great the book, I would be completely intimidated to ask Nick Tosches to take a look at it.
I was, but and he said he wrote me this thing. It's like, I hate reading. He actually said, no, what he did do is he sent me an essay that he wrote about how he doesn't give blurbs and hates reading manuscripts.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was like an article that was in a magazine. And then he writes at the bottom, but if it really means something to you.
Oh, he says here.
I'll do it.
I'll just read this first line. It has been a long time since I have regarded the prospect of taking up a new first novel other than with dull dread and a sardonic snort of rightfully prejudicial dismissal. It's like the time he's taking and the eloquence he's using to explain why he doesn't want to read shit is staggering.
I know.
But you must have had a relationship.
But he did it. Because, like I said, he sent me this article that he attached this article he wrote about how he doesn't read manuscripts and blurb. I hate him. And they're in a box with the rubber band and pages and pages. And then the last thing he said, but if it really means something to you, I'll do it. And man. I pushed the end. I really shouldn't have imposed on him. But.
Well, it's first of all, he clearly really liked the book, and it was really up his alley. I mean,
I guess to some.
I mean, Nick was he wanted to preserve the sleaze, the grit, mean streets, basically, in New York. He was so pissed about what he was looking at in Tribeca.
And stuff,
and the grit, grime, sleaze getting washed away. And you dig into that world beautifully in this book. I want to get back to Zopa though for a minute, because I'm only now understanding by meeting you and talking to you that this is a project that really, it sounds like, was almost 40 years, in the making, in your consciousness.
Yeah.
Did you always, throughout your career in television and film and screenwriting and theater, etc., did you always think at some point, I'm going to circle back around to my music?
Yeah. I mean, I kept playing and writing on my own. And then before I started Zopa, I started spending a lot of time with electric guitar and just trying to figure out some sounds. And it just became like the need outweighed the fear and that basically. So This was around 2005, end of 2005.
And at that point, had you performed on stage, singing, playing
Music?
guitar?
No.
In how long?
Only once with Patti Smith. I sang. She brought me on stage to sing "Be My Baby" with her.
Oh wow!
Just because we were friendly, at the time. Well, still friendly, but it wasn't because she knew I played music or anything. But no, and then I was like, it has to be. It's also a hard thing to start a band. You have to find the right.
I wouldn't know anything
ingredients.
about it. I wouldn't know anything about it.
It's very hard.
Yeah.
No, right? I mean,
there's a moment. Maybe you meet a person, a people, and you either grab that moment or it's gone.
It's like like a love relationship. So I wasn't sure what to do, and I said the first thing I need is to work with a drummer. So I didn't know what to do exactly. And I was at a party right around that time, and I ran into a guy who, around I Shot Any World time, I did a movie called Postcards from America about the artist David Wojnarowicz. Mm-hmm. And I played David's friend. 3 actors played David Wojnarowicz. The 18-year-old David was played by an actor named Michael Ty, who went on to be guitarist in Jeff Buckley's band, Grace. Toured with Jeff, wrote a lot of music with him. His younger brother was 8 years old. Michael Ty's younger brother, Olmo, was 8 and played him as a boy. And I met Olmo during the making of that movie.
You go that
he
far
was
back.
8 and I was 25.
Huh.
Now, I didn't see Olmo again. Michael and I did a couple of plays together after in the years following that movie. And then we kind of would see each other now and then. He went into music almost exclusively. And I run into Michael and I said, "Oh, how's your brother?" I hadn't seen him since he was 8. He goes, "Oh, Olmo plays the drums and he works at the Strand bookstore." Now, I don't know why. He didn't say he plays, like John Bonham, or he plays in the style of, whoever, I don't know what the fuck it was. I got it in my head that I had to go look him up.
Okay.
I do not know why. So I start going to the Strand a lot because they wear name tags, and I'm figuring one day I'm going to see a name tag that says Olmo.
Right.
I start going like a couple of times a week, and I don't find him. Finally, I write a note. I asked somebody, "Does a guy named Olmo he work?" He goes, "Yeah, he works in the warehouse." I said, "Can you give him this note?" And he calls me. He's like, "Yeah, you want to jam?" I'm like, "Okay." So 2 of us meet, we jam, and it just was good.
All right.
I mean, the chemistry was good. He said, "Do you want to work with a bass player?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "A guy that I know since high school. We played together a bit. I'll invite him." So the day before the 3 of us are going to meet, I'm at the flea market with my wife, talking to this guy who has a booth, who's a friend of my wife's, and this kid walks up to me and goes, "Oh, I'm playing bass with you tomorrow."
Oh, shit.
I'm Elijah. I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." And it turns out his cousin used to manage me as an actor years before. So
Okay.
there's this weird stuff. So then the 3 of us start playing, and that was it. And we started playing in 2006. We started writing music and started doing shows shortly after that. And from 2006 to 2013, we played anywhere they'd have us. We played a shitload of shows, a little bit of touring on the East Coast, and we did a couple of shows in Lisbon and a couple in LA, but played lots of shows in New York,
In Lisbon?
tri-state area. Yeah, it was weird.
Wait. We have a mutual friend. I'm just realizing this because I played in Lisbon. The Wonderland Club, Ian Witchell, in Lisbon.
Ian, yeah, I know Ian.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Because
Yeah.
I played his thing. In Lisbon.
I've known him for a long time, actually.
Yeah, he's
a friend of my buddy Bruno Delmedo, who's a filmmaker. I've done a few movies with him in Lisbon and New York.
And he's like a British guy in Lisbon who puts rock and roll
Yeah.
and DJs.
I think our first show was in Lisbon because of my friendship with Bruno, who was running a club there. and I think Ian was there, if I'm not mistaken. Then we did another show at the Music Box in Lisbon, like 2 years after that. But we played parties, events, all the places everybody plays, lots of shows. And then I moved to California, 2013 or 12. And we recorded an album right before I left. Never released it till the pandemic, believe it or not. But
Wait, this is the La Dolce Vita one?
yeah.
Okay.
And then I moved back to New York, and I started doing live events where I'd read from the book, kind of act out some of the roles.
Yeah.
And I started, that was in 2018, 19, and sometimes I'd have Olmo do some percussion, sometimes I'd have Elijah do some bass. So then we started working again, and then I moved back to New York about a year and a half ago, and then we picked it up again.
Well, this is what I need to know because, after so much time, all of a sudden, here you are on stage. I'm sure a lot has changed since 1986 when you're playing with the band. You're playing all these clubs. You're in these little clubs, no dressing room, or you're in a, bathroom stall changing, whatever it is. This is
Still.
my life.
We were doing that. We were in California last February. We did a tour, and one of the venues, the dressing room was what do they call those things and the ship?
A shipping container?
Yeah, that was the dressing room.
Oh, yeah.
You know that place in Orange County?
Yeah, we played there.
What's that place?
Well,
you know what I'm talking about,
Well,
right?
you and I have a mutual friend, I think, in Jesse Mallon.
Yes.
And Jesse opened for us. We played it in Costa Mesa.
Costa Mesa.
And it's like in a strip mall.
Yeah, in the strip mall. You played. You know that bar?
I do. We played there in February. March.
We were there right before you. Like
And
I think the week before. That's right. I remember seeing that. What's the name of that place?
I
The
don't know.
Wayfarer.
Wayfarer.
Yeah.
And the dressing room is a shipping container without a front,
Right, without a front, and the bathroom is
non-existent.
you got to go into the kitchen.
Which, you play in a band. I don't care what level you're at. One night it's the Ritz, and the next night it's the gutter. And so, a lot of my friends who work as artists in other fields, they always are like, damn, I want to do what you do. I want to go out on the road. I want to have a band, whatever. And I'm like, come out with me for a few days, and then they get a taste and they're like, fuck this.
No, it's not. It's not easy.
So clearly, you're involved with the music because it's part of your quest in some way.
Yeah, well, playing with Olmo and Elijah is immensely pleasurable. Whatever sounds and music we make together, and just because we've done it for a long time, and the sound has evolved and kind of gotten to where we really like it a lot. There's a little more, it gets more pleasurable, I think, because we've never had arguments or anything
you
like
deepen
that.
your relationship.
Yeah.
And and then it takes work to keep that relationship going, but like any relationship, the more you play together.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of discussion. It's all very,
Intuitive.
You know what I mean. Intuitive.
And a weird question is because thank God you continue to act on film, on television, and on stage. How is the music affecting your work, as an actor?
Well,
I don't mean professionally, I mean internally.
The music is it's just us, the three of us. It's our material and we perform it. Most of the time, when you're acting, you're performing someone else's material, right? Although, I've done a little bit of writing where I was able create some of that material, but
Sure.
far minority, is that the majority is performing other people's materials, which sometimes is amazing. But with Zopa, it's just us. It's our stuff, sink or swim,
Yeah.
live or die. It's like that's it. And that freedom. It's also, music is, from my point of view, I'm sure everyone has a different one, far more abstract an art form, and not like linear that way, which it's in some ways a similar mode of expression because it's emotion, it's words, it's connecting, words to emotion and being honest and getting it, sometimes some of the songs are, dialogues almost. So there's similarities, but then the other thing is it's so much more about sound than it is about, you know what I'm saying?
I
mean,
do.
You know better than I do.
But I love hearing you talk about Lou Reed in terms of how ferocious a performer and writer he was to the last day.
Yeah.
It's nice as a fan to think that he had a little bit of peace at home and in himself in his later years. But thankfully, he was so full of fire in his work to the last day.
Till the end. He was, he never became like a nostalgia act and like playing the hits. Although he would play, songs you wanted, but he was always, I mean, look, the Lulu album,
Yeah.
I mean, was so out there. I mean, if you think, the one thing, you would never predict.
Yeah.
And which was relatively late in his career.
And I'm one of the people that really likes that album. And I like when people take risks, and I like when people try something that might fail, an unlikely collaboration. And, he blazed the path that so many different artists have followed, not just musicians, actors, filmmakers, writers.
No doubt.
And have you seen the exhibit yet at New York Public Library?
It's very moving, isn't it?
Well, we're going to be going as part of the show.
Yeah. It's very moving. It's
Yeah.
really, really special. And did you hear I just got it. Somebody sent me the heroin demo from 1965.
Yeah.
He was
Chills.
23.
Yeah.
Some different lyrics, but just like there's something very sweet and innocent about it. And then, the creative process of this guy. I mean, I think Lou
about
changed lyric writing because, Dylan did, Dylan was like, whatever,
Sure.
he did it.
Well-
But Lou's was very different. Lou's was more like, Dylan was more like poetic. When
Sure.
Lou was more like Nick Tosches in a
Sure.
rock band or something.
Sure.
It was more almost novelistic,
Yes.
more like Selby and the Beats and stuff.
Characters. It's
Yeah.
just ripped from the headlines of people's lives.
Yeah.
And this, you said that you came to New York City in the 80s, and then you were exposed to all this kind of music and art and
people and
And
lives.
with Lou, when I got into the Velvet Underground, and this is a very common story, there was a period there, 6 months, where everything else sounded very stupid. When you're listening to the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed, going back and listening to, what's on the radio sounds really trite for a while. Now I kind of balance because you need a little balance. I can listen to the Beach Boys and Lou Reed.
Yeah.
But to think of him writing Heroin and what was on the radio at that time,
1965.
it's like
Amazing, yeah.
it's so beyond and ahead of what was happening.
You heard that demo?
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Well, Light in the Attic, who we also hope to talk to, they're going to put out this whole compilation of all those demos.
Those demos, yeah, which you can hear at the Lincoln Center Library. A lot of the demos are there for you to listen to.
Well, listen, I could talk to you all day. I hope we do this again.
Yeah, that was really fun.
I hope we get more writing from you because this was fantastic.
I'm glad you liked it.
I hope one day somebody has the good sense to make a film out of this because
I've been going back and forth.
I can see it.
I know. I mean, it's sometimes I really want to do it, and then sometimes I feel like it's tricky because I don't know. It's a little bit tricky. I don't know how I feel about it. I go back and forth.
Well, if you wake up one day and you, just like with your music, and it feels right, and the right people and the right time, you'll do it. And if not, that's okay too. The book, something I loved about this, like we're talking about Nick Tosches and Mean Streets and all this stuff, is as we get further and further away from the time that this was set, and New York City changes and generations change and the culture changes, there was something special about that time and that place that I hope that many generations will continue to draw from.
Yeah. I think a lot of generations don't even know they're drawing from that.
Sure.
I just saw this documentary about last week about Max's Kansas City, which in a way was almost more responsible for punk than CBGB
Sure.
because it was older and it was
The Dolls and
yeah,
Blue
and Suicide,
sure.
and the Velvet Underground,
and Andy Warhol just hanging out there.
yeah. But so much of what we take for granted in our culture kind of came from that world.
Yeah.
Sometimes almost all roads lead back to Andy, if you think about it. Movies, music, art.
lot.
If you think how much of a. Can you imagine what Andy Warhol would have done with social media? That's what I always say.
Oh my God. Well, I was reading this thing. There's a fabulous book that maybe you've read or heard of. Is this Widow Basquiat book? Have you heard of this?
I heard of it. I have not
So,
read it.
but this woman who lived with and was involved with Basquiat for many years, she wrote an account of the early '80s in Lower Manhattan, and she says in there, what people don't understand is that this art scene in Lower Manhattan was about 300 or 400 people. That was the sum total of it. And people knew each other, and there was this little web. But from that pool of about 300 or 400 people is some of the greatest music, film, visual art, writing.
Of that time.
Yeah.
And of any time, yeah.
And it's CBGB and Max's, some of these legendary moments. There might have been 50 people
Right.
in the room,
Right. Yeah, they had footage. This Max's movie had footage of Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious did a couple of right before he died.
Solo
performances.
shows.
Yeah, with Jerry Nolan and Arthur Kane.
Yep.
Yeah, I forget who was playing guitar. And apparently it was just I mean, he was sick.
Well,
with
he's
fever.
doing My Way and shit.
Yeah, and he was really sick, and he had a fever. I think he did Chinese Rocks and one other kind of that era, and couldn't remember the word. He was probably
Yeah.
high, and it was a few months later he was gone because Nancy, his girlfriend Nancy Spungen, was
Spungen.
trying to manage him into this solo rock star thing, and we all know where that unfortunately ended up. But
Yeah.
it was interesting seeing some of that footage because it had never been shown before.
Wow.
Of him on stage with that band, Jerry Nolan on drums. And
Well, he's
Arthur
somebody you can't picture being old. You can't picture him being 30.
Kane. He was 21.
You just know that.
He died.
Yeah. Michael,
Thank you, sir.
we'll do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again. Why not?
I wish you all the best with everything
Same,
you do.
Same to you.